Hello, so in a recent video I showed you the hardware I use, and I'm going to show you what software I use to record and edit. So the old software I used to use was Corel Video Studio and OBS. Now I had issues with both of these at 60 frames per second, so I've changed the software that I use. I've gone over to Dxtory and Shadowplay for doing the recording, and Sony Vegas Pro 13 for doing the editing. Now both of these have the drawbacks in that they're expensive. Well, Sony Vegas is expensive, Dxtory does cost you some money. I also use Paint.net for doing the graphics, and I use Audacity for doing little bits of audio work. First, let's have a look at Shadowplay, which is part of the GeForce experience. So you have to have NVIDIA graphics cards for this, but it does mean that it's actually free once you've bought the graphics card. For some reason it is quite slow to load, but you don't have to load it every time you do a recording, it just runs in the background. GeForce Experience also does a variety of other things. It keeps your drivers and itself up to date. It does optimize games, but this doesn't work for Battlefield 4 or CTE. For Battlefield 4 it doesn't work because of the Battlelog browser, and it doesn't work with CTE because it doesn't understand CTE. It knows what your hardware is, it's got a library of video games, and it makes the settings optimized for gameplay. Now that doesn't mean they're optimized for recording. So I don't use the game optimization. But the thing we are interested in is Shadowplay, and you can check that it's activated and available in this window, but the setup of Shadowplay is here. There's a simple toggle switch which turns Shadowplay on or off, and then you've got four basic options for it. First of these is the mode. Now I use it in manual mode, which means when I press F9 it starts recording, when I press F9 it stops recording. I don't use the shadow record, which basically records the last 5 minutes of gameplay when you hit a button, and I don't use the Twitch recording. So I just use straight manual, press F9 and it will record. When it comes to quality I use a custom setting. So basically I record at the game's native resolution at 60 frames per second and at 50 megabytes per second. Now you can record way over 50 megabytes per second, you can go up to 250, but there's not really a lot of point, which I'll come to when we get to rendering and YouTube. Last thing is the audio, and I only record the in-game audio because its microphone recording is very basic, it's just on all the time and it puts it onto the same channel as the video. That's pretty much all there is to Shadowplay. It's very simple. I am going to turn it off now because it does conflict with some of the other recording software when they're all running at the same time. I'm making this recording in OBS doing the screen capture, and I'm about to open Dxtory. So if I had Shadowplay open as well it would get a bit of a mess trying to do a recording. Dxtory opens on my second screen so that when I'm playing games on my main screen I can check what Dxtory is doing. That's why I'm having to drag it in. Now Dxtory isn't free, it's about $30 or £20 in the UK. When Dxtory detects that a game's running it creates one of these profiles. Now Battlefield with a little trademark symbol next to it is the live version of Battlefield, and Battlefield without little trademark is CTE. Then you've got the options to put the frame counter up, and then you come to the recording media. Now Dxtory, if you're going to record in 60 frames or higher, does need a fast hard drive to record to, but you can check the speed of your hard drives. So this is my main SSD. It's going to come out quite a bit slower than it normally would because OBS is recording to that SSD at the same time that I'm doing the test. So usually it would come out about 450 I think. If I test out my standard hard drive, which is the 2TB Seagate Barracuda, then you'll see that it's considerably slower. This hard drive is connected to SATA 3, so it is pretty much as fast as a normal drive is going to be at the moment, but when I test it out you can see it's going to score a lot slower. It comes out at about 150, 160 depending on what's happening when I'm running the tests. Now that is fast enough to record 60 frames a second to, but if you want to get it properly reliable it's best to record to an SSD. The next tab in Dxtory is your hotkeys. Now all my recording software records on F9, screen captures on F11. Now on to what's really the most important part, the video settings. So I use the Matrox MPEG 2 iframe HD codec. Now this is simply because it was the one selected by Jack Frags. There are a ton of codecs on here, none of which I understand. I'm just using that one because that's what he suggested. Now again, it's at 60 frames per second and at 50 megabytes per second. Frame rate on the actual settings is 60 frames per second as well. And the only other thing you need to check on here is that the scaling is at 100%. That means it will record at the native resolution that you're playing in. Now we get to the audio, and this is the main advantage of Dxtory. If you set up two audio devices to record in this screen, it will record them to separate channels. And that means that a lot of the video editing software will separate them out as well, and you can edit them both individually. So I have my speakers recording on one channel and my Samsung mic recording on the other channel. Now the rest of the options in Dxtory I haven't changed anything to do with screenshots or the advanced settings. I just leave those as they were. The only time you really need to play around with any of this kind of stuff is if you're having trouble recording. So when I had Crossfire cards in mine, I had trouble with that, so I had to use the multi-GPU options. Like I say, Dxtory is very good, but it's not free. It is quite cheap at $30 or £20, and it is probably worth it if you're going to do a lot of recording, especially at 60 frames per second. OBS is perfectly good for recording at 30 frames per second, but I found real issues trying to get it to record reliably at 60 frames per second. Now the next piece of software I wouldn't recommend if you're just starting a channel. This is Sony Vegas Pro 13. It is very expensive. It's about $600 or £400 in the UK. Now the cheaper alternatives like Corel Video Studio work well. Here you can see the undistriction video in its raw form. So there are three distinct layers. You've got the video layer at the top, then you've got the game audio layer, and then you've got the narration layer underneath. The video was recorded in Shadowplay and the narration was then done later in Sony Vegas. And we can take a look at it in the preview window. Hello! So lots of things in Battlefield 4 are destructible. These bridges on Dragon's Valley you can blow up. Because the audio is on a separate track to the game sounds, it means you can then mute different pieces or drop the volume of different pieces, and so now I've got no commentary over this video. So even recording live commentary, it means you can drop the volume levels of the gameplay, increase the levels of the commentary, remove hiss effects, things like that. So it gives you much more editing options for the sound. Now when I use Corel Video Studio, I only ever use two transitions, fade to black and crossfade the two clips together. And you can do that pretty simply in Vegas as well. To fade to black, all you do is butt the two clips together and then grab the top corner and pull back how long you want it to take to fade to black. And then on the other clip, you do it in the opposite direction to say how long you want it to go from black back into the video. So it's a very simple way to include a transition. And if we play that, you can see in the preview that one video fades down to black and then the next video clip is going to fade from black back into the video. So you get a very simple, clean transition. Now a lot of video editing software has very complicated transitions in it, and to be honest, they usually look a bit cheap and tacky. So here I'm trying to remove these fade to blacks, and with my eyesight it can be a bit dodgy trying to pick up exactly where the lines and the corners are. But eventually I'll get rid of them, and what I'll do is then merge the two clips together. And in Vegas that's as simple as dragging one over the top of the other, and then what it will do is crossfade the two clips automatically. And basically a crossfade is simply where one clip starts playing before the other one's finished. So those are the two transitions I use because they're very simple, very easy to do. In fact, in Corel they were easy to do, but they're even easier in Sony Vegas. The other major bit of editing that I do in Sony Vegas is adding these commentaries. So this is the example in this video. Hello! So lots of things in Battlefield 4 are destructible. these bridges on Dragon's Valley, you can blow up and stop vehicles. And they are incredibly easy to do because Vegas will create an audio track for them. All you do is move down to this little button here, click it and start talking. And that's pretty much all the editing that I do on videos. In fact, finding the clips is often the hardest bit. Going through all the videos and working out which bit you want. Videos are put up here in the media library. So you can see there's the intro, the actual video that I recorded, and the WAV file, which is this narration. Last but not least is the technical bit, which is rendering. So you simply go up and click render as. Now this does take quite a while to load up because I added a bunch more rendering options to Sony Vegas. Now there's quite a long list and it takes it a while. I need to go back and take some of them out because I really only use a few of them. The format I use, because it was recommended by Jack Frags, is the Sony AVC/MVC format, which is an MP4 format. And there are a couple of standard options labelled Internet. There's one that's 1080p and there's one that's 720p, both at 30 frames per second. Now those will do pretty well for most YouTube videos, but for 60 frames per second you're going to have to customise one. So I customised the 1080p 30 frames per second option to turn it into a 1080p 60 frames per second option. Now for some reason on the full view you can't do that, but on the normal view you've got the customise option. If you click on that, it brings up all the settings for your profile. Video format is AVC, frame size is high definition, which is 1080p, then we've got high and codec. Now the frame rate is 59.9 because it doesn't actually do 60 frames per second, it's double NTSC. The next important bit is the bit rate, which is at 25 million or 25 megabytes per second. Now that's as high as this will go, which is why there's not really much point recording at 250 megabytes per second when you're going to scale it down in here, and then YouTube's going to scale it down when you upload it. This I leave on automatic because I'm not exactly sure what option it should be on, so I'll let it pick itself. Unless you're doing music or singing, then the standard audio settings are the same, as is pretty much everything else in here. I just leave it the same as the standard profile. So the only thing I've really customised is the frame rate and the bits per second. Now I haven't done any experimenting with this, I'm simply using the settings that Jack Frags recommended in one of his recent videos. And once you've got your profile set up, all you need to do is then select it and click render. And it will take a while to render. A 10-minute video at 25 megabytes per second, 1080p, 60 frames a second will take about half an hour to render on my PC. Once it's rendered, you can then upload it to YouTube in the usual way. The only change I've made is I now upload them as unlisted, wait for them to finish processing and then make them public so that the 1080p 60 frames per second version is available straight away. And that's how I record and edit. So I hope you found that useful, and thanks for watching.